There's a personality system built entirely around one question: what are you most afraid of, and what are you chasing to avoid it? It's called the Enneagram, and unlike some personality tests, it isn't really about what you do, it's about why you do it. 9 types, 9 completely different core fears, and a strange 9 pointed symbol connecting all of them together, showing exactly how each type behaves under stress and who they become when they grow. Some types chase achievement to feel worthy, some chase peace to avoid conflict entirely, and some are terrified of being ordinary. Let's break down all 9. The Enneagram's roots are genuinely strange. The 9 pointed symbol itself was popularized in the West by the mystic George Gurdjieff in the early 20th century, but it wasn't mapped onto 9 personality types until the 1960s when Bolivian philosopher Oscar Ichazo developed the framework in Chile. Psychiatrist Claudio Naranjo, who studied with Ichazo starting in 1970, later fleshed the system into the psychological types people use today. He's sometimes called the father of the modern Enneagram, with Ichazo considered its grandfather. It eventually spread through Jesuit spiritual retreats in the 1970s, taught quietly at first before becoming the pop culture personality framework it is now. One important note before we start: unlike some personality science, the Enneagram doesn't have the same rigorous scientific backing as frameworks like the Big Five. Psychologists generally treat it less like a validated diagnostic tool and more like a structured lens for self reflection, and it's worth keeping that distinction in mind as we go. Type 1 is the reformer, their core fear is being wrong, flawed, or corrupt, and it drives a constant, quiet pressure to improve everything around them, themselves included. They tend to have a strong inner critic and hold themselves to standards most people would find exhausting. Interestingly, ones often suppress anger without even realizing it. Their calm exterior can be hiding real frustration underneath, since the type's core belief is that anger itself is somehow improper or dangerous to express. Ones also tend to hear a constant internal voice comparing reality against an ideal standard, sometimes called their inner critic, and it rarely, if ever, fully switches off, even during moments most people would consider a success. Under stress, they can swing toward the moodiness of Type 4. In growth, they loosen into the spontaneity of Type 7, finally allowing themselves to enjoy something without judging it first. Type 2 is the helper, their core fear is being unwanted or unloved, so they build their sense of worth around being needed by others. Twos are often the first to notice when someone's struggling and the last to admit they need support themselves. That's the paradox. The type most focused on everyone else's needs is frequently the worst at naming their own, sometimes to the point of feeling resentful that no one reciprocates a need they never actually voiced out loud. Under stress, twos can become surprisingly forceful, echoing Type 8. In growth, they open up emotionally toward the self awareness of Type 4. Type 3 is the achiever. Their core fear is being worthless without accomplishment, so they chase success, recognition, and image, sometimes so effectively that even they lose track of where the performance ends and the real person begins. Threes are often the most naturally charismatic type in a room, but that charisma can double as a shield, carefully curated to make sure nobody sees whatever the 3 considers an unpresentable version of themselves. Under stress, they can withdraw and disengage like an unhealthy Type 9. In growth, they build the steady, loyal commitment of Type 6. Type 4 is the individualist. Their core fear is having no identity or significance, so they chase authenticity and uniqueness almost as a survival strategy. Feeling ordinary is often more distressing to a 4 than feeling sad. Melancholy, to them, can actually feel more meaningful than mundane happiness, which is part of why 4s are so often drawn toward art, music, and anything that lets them express an emotional depth other types might rush to fix or avoid. 4s also tend to compare themselves constantly to others, quietly convinced that everyone else received some essential ingredient they were missing, even though, from the outside, 4s are often seen as the most distinctly themselves out of all 9 types. Under stress, they can become clingy and dependent like an unhealthy Type 2. In growth, they find the grounded discipline of Type 1. Type 5 is the investigator. Their core fears being incapable or overwhelmed by the demands of others, so they retreat into knowledge, privacy, and self sufficiency. 5s often recharge through solitude, not socializing, and they tend to mentally budget their energy the way other people budget money. A long social event can feel less like fun and more like a withdrawal from a limited account. Under stress, they can spiral into scattered, restless behavior, like an unhealthy Type 7. In growth, they access the bold decisiveness of type 8. Type 6 is the loyalist, their core fears being without support or guidance, so they prepare obsessively for worst case scenarios most people never even consider. That vigilance is often mistaken for pessimism, but it's really just a highly tuned threat detection system running in the background at all times. Sixes are frequently the ones who ask, but what if? Not because they're negative, but because they've already mentally rehearsed the answer. There are actually two flavors of this type: phobic sixes who outwardly show their anxiety, and counterphobic sixes who confront their fears head on instead of avoiding them, sometimes looking almost like a type 8 from the outside, even though the underlying fear is completely different. Under stress, sixes can chase validation and status like an unhealthy type 3. In growth, they settle into the calm trust of type 9. Type 7 is the enthusiast. Their core fear is being trapped in pain or limitation, so they chase new experiences, ideas, and possibilities to stay perpetually one step ahead of anything negative. Relentless positivity can look like joy from the outside, but for a 7, it's frequently a sophisticated way of avoiding discomfort rather than actually feeling it. The constant search for the next exciting thing can sometimes be less about curiosity and more about never having to sit still with something painful. Sevens also tend to reframe difficult experiences almost instantly, finding a silver lining so quickly that people around them sometimes wonder if they've actually processed the hard part at all. Under stress, they can become rigid and critical, like an unhealthy type 1. In growth, they discover the depth and focus of type 5. Type 8 is the challenger, their core fears being controlled or made vulnerable, so they build strength, confidence, and control as a kind of armor. Eights are often the first to confront a problem head on, but underneath that toughness is usually a much softer fear of being hurt, one most eights would never openly admit to, since vulnerability itself can feel like the exact weakness they've spent a lifetime protecting against. Ironically, eights often build their closest relationships with people who are willing to stand up to them, since backing down too easily can read to an 8 as a lack of honesty rather than kindness. Under stress, they can withdraw completely like an unhealthy type 5. In growth, they access the warmth and vulnerability of type 2. And type 9 is the peacemaker. Their core fear is conflict, loss, and separation, so they merge with the people around them to keep the peace, sometimes losing track of their own opinions in the process. Nines are often described as the easiest type to get along with, but that calm exterior can quietly bury real needs and frustrations for years without anyone, including the 9, fully noticing, since conflict feels so threatening to their inner peace that avoiding it can start to feel more important than being heard. Nines sometimes describe a strange experience of forgetting themselves in relationships, gradually adopting a partner's or friend's opinions, hobbies, and preferences as their own, without quite noticing the shift happening. Under stress, they can become anxious and indecisive, like an unhealthy type 6. In growth, they find the confident engagement of type 3.